war has changed the world. Although it ended many years ago, the echo of the horrors which it brought resounds to this day, and its effects are still shaping the world. The deaths of over 60 million people, suffering, concentration camps, torture, rape, and hunger of the next tens of millions have forever changed the course of history. Their memory must not be buried in oblivion. However, one should not overlook the enormous, direct impact that war had on the economy, not only in the context of the reduction of labor resources. The war almost redefined economics, among other things, causing huge material losses to many countries, losses which have not been settled to this day. The destruction of entire cities, infrastructure, reserves, crops, workplaces, factories, military equipment, and many other economically important goods and units was enormous and undermined the economic status of affected countries for decades. The scale leaves no doubt. It was necessary to identify the guilty ones. The losers had to comply, at least by design, and in an ideal scenario. The first attempts to account for losses caused by hostilities were made during the meeting of the leaders of the most important Allied countries, Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin in Yalta. The main topic of this conference was the division of German lands amongst the winners, which ultimately led to the outbreak of the Cold War and a clear division of the world. The discussion continued in Potsdam shortly after the fighting ceased. However, without Roosevelt, who died shortly before the meeting and was replaced by the new U.S. President, Harry Truman. During the conference, Churchill also had to give up his seat and welcome new British Prime Minister, Clement Attlee. Potsdam was the last conference of the so-called Big Three. There, next to Tehran and Yalta, decisions which shaped the world we know today were made. One could say the world under Stalin's dictation. While discussing reparations, the largest countries are usually taken into account, ignoring the smaller ones, though no less affected by the war. In this context, the controversial plan of the Dutch is particularly noteworthy. It assumed the takeover of a significant part of the border areas of Germany, exactly 1,750 square kilometers, where several hard coal mines were located, and the expulsion of their native inhabitants. The Dutch Territory Enlargement Committee was created. Of course, the Allies did not agree and did not take the Dutch plan seriously. Nevertheless, two small German villages covering an area of 69 square kilometers were incorporated into the Netherlands. They were under the Dutch rule from 1949 to 1963, when they were returned to their rightful owners. Post-war compensation, i.e. reparations, were an equally significant topic. The Allies did not want to repeat the mistakes of the Versailles Treaty after the Great War. The high payments ordered then provoked resistance and eventually ceased to be regulated. They also led to further conflicts, which culminated in the form of the just-ended Second World War. Therefore, the approach to the reparations was relatively mild. They tried not to require any unpayable sums, and not to lead to further economic destruction of the countries which were obliged to cover them. First of all, the reparations were not supposed to take the monetary form, and came from the dismantling of equipment, factories, and production lines, as well as other valuable goods located in Germany and Austria, occupied by the Allies. Of course, other countries allied with the Nazis during the war were also charged with the obligation to pay war reparations, but definitely smaller. For example, Italians paid reparations, among others, to Greece and Albania, although problems occurred in the process, especially in the context of Greece. Shortly after the war, the Russians strengthened their influence in Central and Eastern Europe. One of the elements of building the dominant position of the USSR was stating that reparations for Poland, which was one of the most ruined countries during World War II, would be paid by the Soviet Union itself as a percentage of compensation received from the Germans. This action was aimed at gaining stronger control over the international and economic situation of Poland, which the USSR sought to subordinate to its policy. Obviously, the Russians did not intend to support Poland in a really valuable way or give away a part of reparations which proved to be significant from the point of view of the USSR. Therefore, old wagons and even Marxist books were sent to the Polish People's Republic. Russians kept more valuable items recovered from the Nazis, including those from German lands incorporated into Poland, for themselves. The balance of such transfers, although not very favorable for Poland, to some extent, however, contributed to the reconstruction of the destroyed country, in which almost everything was missing, including, for example, wagons. However, it was not enough for the Soviets to limit the possibilities of economic reconstruction. On August 23, 1953, under the pressure of Stalin, the government of the Polish People's Republic waived any claims for war reparations against Germany. Today, there are doubts whether this waiver was in accordance with the law, although most experts and the Polish government itself recognize it. For example, the Greeks have similar doubts and are still in dispute with Germany, fighting for the compensation of almost 300 billion euro. The countries of former Yugoslavia also raised demands for their reparations. While discussing the restrictions imposed by Russia, it is worth mentioning the Marshall Plan. It was established in 1947 and assumed considerable financial assistance provided by America to European countries most damaged by the war. The assistance was initially offered to the Western countries, but also to the USSR, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. The Russians did not accept the offered help, and under their influence, Poland and Czechoslovakia also rejected the money. There is no doubt that such a decision affected the economic condition of these countries to a significant extent. It can be considered that Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia would be stronger economically if they had accepted the assistance related to the Marshall Plan. On the other hand, Germany, striving for reconciliation and post-war redress, fought behind the scenes to avoid paying all liabilities even before the unification. Therefore, it is worth asking the question, can we really talk about reconciliation and forgiving the nightmare of war if there was no full compensation?